or figs from thistles? In the same way, a sound tree produces good fruit, and a rotten tree produces bad fruit. A sound tree cannot produce rotten fruit, and a rotten tree cannot produce good fruit. Any tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown in the fire. I repeat, you'll be able to tell them by their fruit. It isn't those who cry out, my Savior, who will enter the kingdom of heaven. Rather, it is those who do the will of God in heaven. When that day comes, many will plead with me, Savior, Savior, have we not prophesied in your name? Have we not exorcised demons in your name? Don't we do many miracles in your name as well? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Out of my sight, you evildoers. Anyone who hears my words and puts them into practice is like the sage who built a house on rock. When the rainy season set in, the torrents came and the winds blew and buffeted the house. It didn't collapse because it had been set solidly on rock. Anyone who hears my words but does not put them into practice is like the fool who built a house on sandy ground. The rains fell, the torrents came, the winds blew and lashed against the house, and it collapsed and was completely ruined. Jesus finished speaking and left the crowd spellbound at his teaching, because he taught with an authority that was unlike their religious scholars. Ancient words for present-day consideration.
Good morning. It's good to see everybody here. The good thing is you don't know what the sermon topic is yet, because I think the place would thin out pretty fast. We're going to talk today, lock the doors. We're going to talk about original sin. Go ahead, get the groans out. We'll get that. Probably nothing about the church has done as much damage as that concept that we're born evil. And there's really no way of fixing it easily. I think it's helpful to realize that in our passage today, Jesus is condemning that view of Christianity that dresses up in lamb's clothing to present a message of hate and fear. I want you to know, as a spoiler for the sermon, that a loving atheist is infinitely closer to what Jesus was saying and doing than a cruel theologian, even if they're completely orthodox. Jesus in our passage today says cruelty is an instant disqualification. It doesn't matter how solid the theology is, how convincing, which is good for me, that it's, have to be persuasive. But the point is, if it doesn't lead to love, Jesus is saying, don't do it. Now, what we don't realize about all of the ancient people is that they were much more intelligent and creative than we give them credit for. The book of Genesis begins with two creation stories that contradict each other. Theologians should not be able to turn that into literal claims, but they do. But the more you make excuses for it, the worse it gets. This is mythology. This is sacred poetry. You have to have a sense of humor to stay with the plot line. The whole idea of inventing two new people, they're about a week old, and you put them in a garden and then put a beautiful fruit tree and say, don't eat that. That's not real smart. They're 2 weeks old, 1 week old, who knows? They don't know right from left yet. And then to put a talking snake in the same garden without doing a background check. It's like putting an M&M mousetrap in a crib, right? That's how cruel the Garden of Eden story is, if you take it literally. It has to be read and understood tongue-in-cheek. That human beings can mess things up. We're really good at that. That doesn't mean we're created bad. It doesn't mean life is created bad. But just looking at the internet, this was a fresh start. This was a new Eden. The internet. We could make it anything we want. And somebody somewhere the next day said, I know, I'll invent a virus. I'll mess that up for everybody else. So there's something, we're a beautiful species, but we've left our environment, we've left the garden, and we get triggered in some very unhealthy ways and unhappy ways. In our traditional passage, Jesus is railing against that notion that just calling him Savior is going to make it work. See, that's what I was taught in seminary. We're born evil. There's nothing we can do to make that better. So we throw ourselves on Jesus. Say, Savior, Savior. And then we get a ticket, a free ticket. Jesus is saying that's not, I think Jesus should get a word in somewhere in his teachings. But the entire Sermon on the Mount and a lot of John have just been put in an outhouse. And when we bring those words back, it's obvious that it's the church traditionally that has missed the mark. The word sin means to miss the mark. What is the mark? Uh-oh. Okay. I guess, yes, love. I guess I haven't been here long enough. Love. That's the punchline, right? It's a one-trick pony. When we don't know what the answer is, we come back to that truth. We've been looking at mystical Jewish poetry that's grouped by a feminine figure, Sophia, who represents wisdom. And we see a much smarter view of religion. We see a much more balanced view, male, female kind of stuff, power, and just human worth for who we are. People that heard Jesus would have heard this poetry first, which means they would be hearing Jesus in the context of Sophia, not Sophia in the context of Jesus. So for the last however long it's been, we've been looking at these passages and seeing how that spirit that was all around the Mediterranean at the time, you saw it in Judaism, you saw it in all kinds of religion, but it was smarter and it was more compassionate than what happened after the church got to Europe. That's when things got bad. It was the first couple centuries were an entirely different religion than what happened when it got organized by an empire and reframed. So let's look at the Sophia passage. For God is not the author of death and does not delight in desolation. God created all things to be alive. All things of the world were made to be wholesome, and there is no poison in them. The netherworld, heaven, hell, etc., the netherworld has no power over the earth, for justice lasts forever. But rebels court death with their actions and words. They call death friend and long for its company. They make deals with death and are death's worthy partners. Think there's a little bit more? Not? That's it? Okay. All things are created good. Remember that line in Genesis? God looked at the world and declared it good. Calvin begged to differ a little bit. So we have to choose whether our religion is going to be based on love and a courage to change and go into the future, or if we're always going to try to get back to a religion that never really was. There's enough of us trying to get back to a country that never really was. Right? When you reject change, you reject life. And that idea that America used to be this perfect place, there's a whole bunch of us here that would beg to differ. So making America great again is the kind of lie that people only tell when they're afraid of change and afraid of justice, what justice would mean. Frank Sinatra used to say he believed in whatever gets you through the night. Not to differ with the dead, but the problem is you wake up the next day. So there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that was intended to help people get past their fears. And one of the fears people had, a lot of people had, was of hell. So when Paul went around, he wasn't trying to scare people using hell. He was trying to say there's a way out of that. That whatever mistake you've made, however much you've blown it, that Jesus can save you from that. Religion had caved in. When Greece and Rome crushed all of these cultures, people panicked because now their gods didn't work anymore. So Paul was trying to work empathetically, trying to give people some kind of hope. But it's a very evil thing when modern Christians get people afraid first so the theology still works. You have to get somebody afraid of hell first, and then you say you can be saved. That's a very different thing than than Paul was doing. The problem with traditional salvation atonement theories is, by definition, the emotional energy that makes them work is fear. Right? Now, if you're already afraid, that's a compassionate thing to enter into that kind of imagery. But anything begins with fear will end with cruelty. Think about it. Particularly religion. When the energy of religion, and see, this is great stuff for ministers, for clergy. So I'm ruining the game here. When you build a world system out of fear, you'll probably give more money. You'll question less what the preacher says. But it's going to hurt your life. It's going to be like a cancer that eats everything from the inside out. So what Paul and Jesus were trying to do is have people restore their hope in life. Because one of the ways we fall out of being able to love other people and ourselves is we lose hope in love. It's very easy to do. We lose hope, and then we just try to fill in with other things that we hope will mean as much, but nothing does. So faith is not so much belief in God. If you don't believe in God, that's just the symbol stuff. Do you still have faith in love? Because that's where Jesus is trying to lead us. How you picture that. Any image you have of God is ridiculous. Right? Any definition you have of something that's infinite is going to be a little dumb. It can be helpful symbolically. But when we start treating our symbols logically, it tears everything up. So the first way to kind of fall back in love with life is to look for where we've given up on love and to come back to that. And the second thing that happens, I think, to love is that we lose faith in who we are. We lose the courage to be who we authentically are. It's very easy to do because you get punished for being who you are. Somebody somewhere doesn't like you, doesn't approve. And when it happens early enough, you're a kid. And so you start wearing disguises. That's what the fig leaves are about. You start making yourself presentable to somebody else who doesn't really love you in the first place. And the more skillful you are at disguising who you are, the more impossible it is for other people to find you, to find your heart, to love you in the way that you need to be loved. Has anybody here ever gone on a date? I guess that's the first question. The second question. Have you ever gone on a date and you rehearsed what you were going to say?
Go first.
And how did that work? When we try to pretend to be something that we're not, so other people will like us and respect us. I mean, this is a big pitfall for clergy, huge pitfall. It's very rare indeed when a minister doesn't start wearing a mask just so people don't look disappointed all the time. You should have seen the first couple of years, I started trying to be honest. In the pulpit, it's like these especially Easter, people come with their, Easter bonnets and the flowers would just kind of off to the side. But it's so much better. We can only be who we authentically are. And when we have the courage to do that, that becomes a gift that nothing else can replace. But that takes faith. So then the third way we fall out of love, I think, is to fall out of the whole of things. Life is a circle. Life is a cycle. Death is as much connected to it as his birth. Defeat and failure are just as important for spiritual maturity as success. But that's real hard to live with. And what we try to do is be happy with some piece of life, some part of the whole. If you remember a time when you're deliriously happy, you're usually interwoven with everything. The little birds are singing, the woods are enchanted. But when we get afraid or wounded or frustrated, we try to build a little niche within the circle of life. We try to build a shelter where change isn't going to rob us of the things and people we love. We have to fall in love with the whole circle of life. We have to. It rips our hearts out when we think we can be happy with any part of life, including, this body, right? It takes a long time to make peace with the fact that life is change. When we reject change, we're rejecting life. That's what Jesus meant when he said those who seek to save their life actually lose it. When fear gets the main vote, we lose the sense of the joy of being in the river of life. And that the losses and the sacrifices are worth it because it's all a dance of love. Which is why love has to grow into justice. The Christianity that doesn't care about the refugee coming across the border. The type of Christianity that puts razor wire to protect itself from the people it's exploited for centuries. The Christianity that puts immigrants on buses and drives them around. That tortures our LGBTQ family. Will not let there be a space for people who are different than them. Those are lambs in wolf's clothing. And it is so important in the name of Christ to reject that Christianity. Lock, stock, and barrel. When love becomes justice, that means I care about your happiness as much as my own. Now, I may not feel that. I'm a human being, and I feel my happiness more than I feel yours. But the spiritual life is transcending that and listening to you until I can feel your joy and your sadness and your pain. And that becomes more and more important to me until I realize it's a common life, one common life, and everything is interwoven. And what I do to you, I'm really doing to myself. So there are three gifts, I think, in our passage today. One is we fall out of happiness. First of all, we're created good, or not created. It happens. Maybe it's evolved, maybe it's creation. I don't know. I have my suspicions, though. But we're born good. We're born human. But it's very hard not to fall out of the life of love. And it's so helpful to have these myths and stories and teaching stories that remind us that it's very easy to lose hope in love. And that's a spirit, why hope is a spiritual virtue. Even if you lose hope in everything else, do not lose your hope in love. Even if you can't affirm anything else about yourself, to realize you are a gift, that you're created, you're a love story that started way before your parents. That people loved you into existence. There's nothing poison about you. You need to stop listening to the people that judge you. Start listening more to the people who can see who you really are. And then finally, maybe the hardest is to live in the whole of things, to embrace all of life, all of nature, and to realize that all of it together is good. So even if something happens to me, that I would lose faith in life, to realize that's only a small part of it. I belong to the whole circle of life. And the more I can remember that, the more stable love is. Bottom line is this. Jesus is calling us to love. A loving atheist is getting it right. A hateful Christian is getting it wrong. The faith Jesus is talking about is not a belief in a fairy tale God. It's a belief that comes from the very core of your being that trusts in love. Well, this is my understanding of our text today. We'll take a moment now for you to think about how you would preach this.